Hi, Mark.
Hi, Byron. How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, very good. I haven't done Blogging Heads in a long time.
I know I haven't either. It's been quite a while. I've been out. What did I do? What have I been doing? I did Iowa,
There's an election
New Hampshire,
going on, yeah.
Michigan, South Carolina, Florida, and then Super Tuesday I went to Phoenix for McCain. That's what I did.
Wow,
and,
great.
And here we are, kind of over on the Republican side for all intents and purposes.
I just for viewers' information, I did none of those things. I voted. I voted. That's all I can really say.
Well, I did vote in the District of Columbia primary.
Good.
Not sure how many Republicans were in my voting precinct. I know my wife and I went to vote in 2000. I remember. And the voters in this precinct were just lined up around the block, and I thought, this is going to be a problem.
No, you go right to the front of the line.
And it was a problem, actually.
It was?
Well, in 2000,
right, you're all in the same line.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we're going to start with Democrats this morning, and
good topic.
The whole deal that strikes me as kind of interesting is this whole John Lewis superdelegate thing.
Right.
John Lewis being the civil rights icon, congressman from Georgia, and endorser of Hillary Clinton until maybe now. And so, I mean, in your view, so the word is that he's thinking about changing his mind. Right.
Well, there was a New York Times story to that effect, and then apparently something just in the last couple hours that said maybe that story wasn't quite accurate, but.
Well,
there's obviously something going on.
On the other hand, there are some black public officials who previously endorsed Hillary Clinton. And remember back, several months ago, all the polls said that African Americans favor. She has a big lead, Hillary Clinton. Right. They favor Hillary Clinton. She has a big lead among African Americans. And somewhere along the way, maybe beginning in November, that just went away.
Right.
And the results of the polls. Especially in the states that have significant black populations like South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, we've seen 80+% among African American voters for Obama. Right. So it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think in John Lewis's district in Georgia, went 80% for
That's
Obama.
Right. That's right.
So why shouldn't he change his endorsement?
Well, I mean, exactly. Why shouldn't he change his endorsement? But at the same time, he could choose not to. It's a fascinating phenomenon, and there are two stories here. One is African American support for Obama, and the other story is the superdelegates. And maybe we'll separate them out a little bit. I mean, it wasn't a done deal that Obama would get all this African American support. But it was also always the case, Ron Brownstein of the LA Times talks about wine track candidates and beer track candidates. The beer track candidate is the establishment candidate who kind of, gets the assumed support. And that base always, the African American vote is always basically with that base. It's, it's with Gore in 2000, it's with Clinton, it starts off there. If somebody ever put together the wine track, which is the educated, more affluent white voters, and added to that the African American base, that would be a big start for an insurgent campaign like Obama's. Right. And there was no reason to be sure that he would do it. I think the interesting thing is how the Clinton campaign seems to have kind of made no provision for that happening. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like there was no plan B for what if he does that. And it wasn't natural that he did it, but he in fact did it.
Well, is it really all appeal on economic lines? I mean, in this election,
right,
we have seen a number of groups who, when given the choice to vote for one of them, they do. Blacks have voted overwhelmingly for Obama. In Utah and Nevada, Mormons voted overwhelmingly for Mitt Romney. In several states, evangelicals have voted not overwhelmingly, but they have voted, in big numbers for Mike Huckabee.
Right.
We've kind of seen that phenomenon, and when you think about black voters, Democrats, most things are equal in terms of policy. There aren't these huge differences between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. In fact, when Caroline Kennedy, I remember when she endorsed Obama, she basically said, hey, there really isn't all that much difference in him except he's inspiring. Okay, so you have, they have no great policy objections to Obama. And then they have a black candidate who is absolutely first tier. He's a U.S. Senator. He's got tons of money. He's got a big organization. By any measure, he's a major first tier candidate. So the question is, why would black voters not vote for him?
Right. Well, I think there are two reasons for that. One being that the experience of the son of a Kenyan grad student who's biracial doesn't automatically match up with the experience of most African Americans. Number one, and two, there have been African American candidates who get a huge vote and also a huge turnout. Harold Washington in Chicago being the classic example. And then there are others who, they get African American support, but not in overwhelming numbers, and they don't get particular turnout. Doug Wilder in Virginia was a good example of that. They're actually often relying more on white support than on black support. And I think it was an open question which one Obama would be. If Obama kind of came across more as the elite Harvard-educated law professor type, sort of a little bit what he showed early in the campaign, where he would often kind of answer questions in a long kind of observational way instead of kind of getting to the point. That's a candidate who probably doesn't make connection with working class voters of any race. And that's if he hadn't sort of gotten his message a little sharper and tougher, it's entirely possible that he would have failed to connect to black voters in large enough numbers to dislodge what the Clintons assume is this deep and long-standing bond. But that's history now. It turned out a different way, and it's going to have some really interesting consequences. There was a good article yesterday by Noam Schreiber in the New Republic where he talked about the calculations that a black elected official might make about who's a superdelegate, about whether to kind of follow their district or follow whatever reason they've chosen to endorse to endorse Clinton. And there are a lot of really interesting factors, and one that I loved that he pointed out was, in a given district, and I can imagine this happening in a number of places in New York, in districts in Brooklyn or whatever, you're going to have kind of a middle-class black professional lawyer, whatever, who suddenly realizes, look, I just raised $300,000 for Barack Obama. That's half of what I need to get started on a congressional race. Why not run in a primary against this incumbent who endorsed Clinton and seems out of touch with the district? And you've always had a lot of very, very safe incumbents among black members of Congress, and you're starting to see some challenges there, and this little split might help empower some of those challenges. So there's a lot going on, I think, in black America and black politics that this divide might begin to draw out and sharpen.
Well, now in the larger sense, what is your position on when Democrats come to the end of their process,
right,
one candidate will have gotten more votes than the other candidate. It might be a very small number.
Right.
There could be some disputes about it. But it's likely that we'll have one candidate with more actual popular votes, when you add them all up, than the other one. Now, do you think that's who the superdelegates should throw their support to because they're the choice of the people, or what?
Well, I think popular vote is going to be a hard number to rely on because we don't actually know what the popular vote is in all those caucus states. So we don't even know what it is. And I'm not sure that a superdelegate should jump to the popular vote of the nation or the popular vote of his or her own district or state. And if somebody's most of the superdelegates actually are members of the Democratic National Committee.
Right.
So it's not clear to me where and I think what will happen is they will split in different ways in terms of if they decide to split, if they decide to make a choice like that. Some will take one path, some will take the other. I think the only thing I can say for sure is that if one candidate comes in with a significant lead in pledged delegates, it just isn't going to happen that the superdelegates put the other candidate over the top. Mm-hmm. I just don't see that happening, and they'll take lots of ways to do it. And I think here's my view of the superdelegates who've endorsed Clinton or seem like they might endorse Clinton. There are two reasons people endorse Hillary Clinton. There's love, belief that she'd be a good president, all that on the one hand. There's fear, belief that she's inevitable on the other hand. And there's some who endorse Hillary Clinton out of real love and respect and belief that she'll be a good president. I think Ted Strickland, the governor of Ohio, is probably a good example of that. But, between love and fear has left the building.
Right.
And that's going to free up a lot of people to say, let me see the excuse I might need to make a move here, with probably the African American officials going first. And you cannot, and while it's definitely true that, while I firmly believe that you're not going to have the superdelegates decide the nomination, you're definitely not going to have them decide the nomination if it's racialized, in the sense that all the African American superdelegates say, I got to go with the voice of the people, and white superdelegates are the ones deciding otherwise.
So in other
That's
words,
just ain't going to happen.
Hillary Clinton can't get the election if it's stolen for her by a group of white party hacks.
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to. I don't say you could use the word stolen or not stolen. It isn't going to happen.
Well, the racial thing, the racialized thing, it's kind of fascinating. I asked a black Democrat the other day. I said, "Whatever happens, can you see us?" No, the way I did it, I asked him was this. Given what has already happened, given everything that has already happened in this race, can you envision a scenario in which Hillary Clinton wins and black Democrats say, well, it's a tough race, Obama did a good job, but she won it fair and square? And the answer was no. That's if she wins, it is kind of by definition going to have been based on Bill Clinton's divisive comments in South Carolina or some sort of shenanigans with the superdelegates, so that I got the impression that you could be looking at serious African-American resentment at her, however she wins right now.
Well, that may be. I think that the way the math is right now, for her to win and she will have to do incredibly well in Ohio, which means getting some of the black vote. She'll have to do incredibly well in Texas. She'll have to do incredibly well in Pennsylvania. At that point, I think our perception of the race will have changed. Mm-hmm. For that to happen, something will change, and a kind of assertion of. We'll have a new recognition of her political skills. We'll have some new recognition of maybe Obama's weaknesses. That's kind of like taking a snapshot of the present and saying, okay, if you take this snapshot of the present, project it forward, somehow Hillary Clinton wins. Yeah, probably that would seem kind of crazy, but for her to win, something else is going to happen. And so I'm not sure. I can't speak for the voice of Black America. Mm-hmm. I can't even speak for the voice of White America. But I don't. I think if she wins, I don't really foresee that. All right,
outcome. Now that kind of brings us to this superdelegate thing, superdelegate, this proportional thing, because I was reading in the Washington Post today. New Jersey has 107 delegates,
right?
And Hillary Clinton won in New Jersey, right? And because of the proportional system, she got 11 delegates more than Obama got in New Jersey,
right?
Idaho has 18 delegates.
Right.
And he won in the caucuses. And because of that system there, he won bigger, and Hillary Clinton kind of ignored the caucuses.
Right.
He got 12 more delegates than she did in Idaho, meaning he netted more delegates out of Idaho than she did for winning New Jersey.
Right. That was a great set of numbers, Dan Ball.
Does that make any sense?
As a system, I think you should have a little more weight. I don't think you should go to the winner take. The winner take all is not where you want to go. But I look at it a totally different way. What makes you not contest the caucus states? What were they thinking about that? What was Mark Penn telling her that made them think, okay, we can just basically ignore these delegate-rich states in which you just put up an effort and you could easily win some of them.
You win a state with 107 delegates, you'd think you'd do better than winning a state with 18 delegates. I understand. Well,
it's just a matter of winning them. It's a matter of winning them in different ways. It would have been perfectly easy. It would have taken probably $100,000, a staffer, a little bit of effort to create a situation in Idaho where Obama came out with a net of 1 delegate. Mm-hmm. They let him get a net of 12 delegates out of that state.
I understand what you're saying, that Mark Penn should have understood the system and he should have done it better. I agree with you on that entirely. But to me, it just strikes me as kind of an insane system, and I think it came out of this kind of liberal, they're all winners. We don't want to have any losers. Everybody on the playground can be a winner. And, if somebody wins, he gets a little bit more than the other guy. And elections aren't like that. I mean, obviously George Bush won the presidency on 500 votes in Florida. Somebody's got to win at the end.
That is actually one of the most brilliant applications of sort of conservative social theory to electoral politics. That it's kind of like the school where they never, it's like some my in-laws asked my wife a while back. Whether my daughter, who's 6, whether she actually knows that winning is better than losing, because they play soccer and they have no winners and no losers. I don't. And
there's going to be a winner in November,
I mean, that's not how it came about. It came about because in 1988, the Jesse Jackson supporters complained that they had very little leverage in 1984, even though they had huge votes everywhere, and they cut a deal with the DNC. Tad Devine was involved. I just read this yesterday. And they cut a deal to make sure that they basically had a little more leverage proportional to their vote, and that's not a matter of nobody feeling like a loser. That's a matter of when there are disparate voices in a party. That is how you resolve those voices. I mean, I think there's I think that maybe Huckabee or some of the others in the Republican Party. I mean, lots of people voted for Ron Paul, and he's going to have no voice in the Republican convention. I think it's great to have a little bit of voice in a party that's supposed to be a coalition of different viewpoints. So I don't think it's a crazy system.
The way it's done now is that I know that. Gosh, I'm not sure what the totals are. Obviously, Obama's won the last 8 or 9 contests. Right. Is that right?
Right.
They basically split Super Tuesday.
Right.
But you have a system where if he keeps winning, I mean, he looks like the winner. But you look at the delegate totals, and he has pulled ahead a little bit, but just barely.
Right.
So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think, what you're seeing is the Republican side was not settled quickly.
Right.
I mean, it went all the way through Super Tuesday.
Right.
But it was settled much more decisively. But anyway, that's...
Although, to her credit, I mean, she did win California and New York.
She did.
Which is, I mean, that's how you get a lot of delegates. It's not just from the proportionality, and then he played the system well. But it's the failure of that campaign to do the basic strategy. I've been on this crusade against Mark Penn for a long time, but he's titled as chief strategist, and it's much of what's happened in the Democratic campaign is a failure of basic strategy on the part of the Clinton campaign.
Mm-hmm. Well, but it's part of the candidate as well too.
Yeah.
She can be just a dreadful candidate at times. Now,
at
which kind of leads me to this thing. I get the sense that there is some, I don't want to say queasiness, but possible uneasiness among some liberal supporters with the sort of tone of the Obama campaign, which is, I'm going to bring you hope, and I'm going to promise change. And what kind of change am I going to bring? Well, I'm going to bring real change. And, well, could you be more specific? And it's going to be change that we can believe in.
Right.
And I think that there was, I think Joe Klein and some other people have written about this kind of oddly messianic, self-referential quality to his campaign. And now E.J. Dionne in the Post today writes, Obama is inspirational, of course, but in a particular way. His message has been constant since his Bafo November 10 speech in Iowa. He is less specific about policies than he is in describing the frustrations voters feel with Bush, with Washington, with divisiveness, with partisanship. His consistent promise is not to pass a detailed program, but to change the mood and the style of politics. And, to conservatives and Republicans, I know Bush did some of this in 2000, but it does sound kind of silly. And is there some uneasiness with Obama's message among people who are inclined to support him?
Well, I think there is. There absolutely is. I mean, there's a little of it reflected in Joe Klein. There's almost a blind rage about Obama on the part of Paul Krugman and people like that. Sean Wilentz. I asked Bob Wright the last time I saw him if there's something in the water in Princeton, because there's something particular about. It seems to be concentrated in that part of New Jersey, but he assured me that it seems to be mostly
because she
Obama.
only got 11 more delegates than he did in New Jersey, clearly.
Exactly. But there's a little of that concern, and then of course that is now the official Clinton campaign line. He's in the hope business, I'm in the solution business, right, or whatever the line is this week. It of course neglects the fact that there are in fact detailed policy plans on just about everything you could think of. They're pretty good. I think on foreign policy they're fabulous. The health plan is kind of not quite as good, but it's a hard thing to put together a detailed health plan in the middle of a campaign, which is by its very nature a very different process. I'm one of those liberals who's I feel like I've been I'm a policy wonk. My title is, I've held the title of policy director more than any other job title I've had. But I've been looking at Democratic politics for a long time, and I've been screaming at the TV about you don't talk to people in terms of I'm gonna you'll get this tax credit if you do the following things, and I've got this manufacturing investment fund. You talk about the basic principles, and there's no I always use the example of the Bush-Gore debates in 2000 when Gore had a gazillion little tax things, and Bush said, I have basic principle: everyone's taxes will be lower. Period. And you've got to learn to talk and to speak. Democrats and liberals had to learn to speak in the language of principles and basic goals, as opposed to policy. Policy details are not a language that people can relate to.
Well, but isn't Obama's basic principle and goal to sort of bring us all together, and isn't that kind of ridiculous?
His basic principle
that dies on the first day of his administration, unless he's won by 60-40 or something like that.
I think it's mixing up two things. The basic principle is, his basic principles are, end the war in Iraq, universal health care, do something about climate change, solve those problems. What he has is...
Those are basically the same as hers, aren't they?
Well, of course they are. Of course they are. So the difference is not what you would do, and the difference is if I were running for president, my platform would be the same too. The difference is in the theory of how you would go about doing it. It's a kind of and that is the difference. That's the essential question. I wrote a piece about this called "The Theory of Change Election." Where basically this was when Edwards was still in the race. So the Edwards theory of change is you got this hard partisan mass on the Republican side, empowered by money and right-wing craziness and whatever, and the only way you beat it is you go head on and take it on, which kind of would make sense if there were a big populist movement in this country or something that there isn't. The Clinton theory of change is you find these little narrow points where maybe you can get something done, like maybe the way they passed the children's health insurance program in 1997 or something like that. That's kind of her model for how you do it.
Right.
The Obama model is a little bit like Reagan. You bring in, to me, I think, one reason to support Obama is more Democratic senators will be elected with Obama. So you have much better chance of winning those Senate races in Colorado or Kentucky or wherever, or even Alabama, potentially with Obama. So you bring in, like Reagan, you bring in some new senators that give you a little boost underneath you, and then you're in a better from that position of strength. You find the ways to reach out to people who disagree with you and find common ground around big goals. But you're clear about what your big goals are.
I will say that if he's elected, and also actually if she was, but if a Democrat is elected, the scenario for them looks pretty darn good and pretty awful for the Republicans. I think we're talking 33 or 34 senators up for re-election this year.
Right.
34, I think. 22 are Republicans, and 12 are Democrats.
Right.
So I think the odds favor Democrats very strongly, not only to keep control, but to pick up seats. You could see 55 Democrats after this election. And
you could
Republicans in the
see
House,
56. You could see 56 or 57.
You could,
but everything would have to break in the right direction for that.
And in the House, all the Republicans are retiring. Nobody's going to be there.
Yeah.
It's going to be going to be totally Democratic. All the Republicans are retiring to either go home or to stay in Washington and lobby their former Democratic colleagues or something.
Right.
So it doesn't look good, and this is certainly one of the reasons that conservatives are saying you do need to get behind John McCain. A number of Supreme Court vacancies with a Democratic Senate in the next few years is not a good idea. So I agree that if Obama could pull off this kind of it's always easier to bring people together if you have overwhelming force.
Sure.
And there was, and Republicans were quite pliant in the 1970s when Democrats, I believe, a couple of years had 60 votes in the Senate, had around 280 votes in the House, and you find the parties get along pretty well when that happens.
Well, the only thing to say about that period was that when Democrats had those majorities, they were not liberal majorities. They were merely Democratic majorities. So that even when Bill Clinton comes in 1992, even in those first few years, his Democratic majority includes people like Richard Shelby, who, when they switch, become actually very conservative Republicans. So it was now you have the potential for a majority that is a fundamentally pretty liberal Democratic majority, and we've never had that before.
You do, and one-party government. So there you go. Now, on the unless there's anything else on the Democrats, let's jump to the.
Let's jump to my second favorite party.
All right, now you have a bee in your bonnet. You think that John McCain is somehow hypocritical on the issue. I would never ever charge him with this. Hypocritical on the issue of campaign finance.
That is correct.
All right, and
the issue on which he's made his name.
And it's because he's kind of being cute about whether he'll actually abide by the campaign finance system for the general election, or whether he wants Obama to go along with him as well.
Well, there's a couple issues here. Let's walk through it. There are a couple issues. There's an issue that is related to, I think, kind of gaming the system, which is in the primary system. In the primary system, the way it works is if you agree to an overall spending limit of around $50 million, I think, as well as limits in the individual states. It's a terrible, old-fashioned, screwy system. It's very hard for people to participate in. Most of the candidates didn't. But if you agree to that system, you get matching funds for your small contributions are matched with public funds. McCain, when he was in trouble, agreed to participate in that system. He was certified to get $5 million of funds. The money is the money is ready to go as soon as the Federal Election Commission actually has the money to give him. And he borrowed a lot of money. He didn't use the matching funds as collateral for the loan, but he borrowed a lot of money, basically gambling that if he won New Hampshire, he'd raise money, he wouldn't need the public funds. If he lost, he'd take the public funds and pay off the.
He actually used the life insurance policy.
Instead, he used the life insurance policy and the value.
He bet his life on the campaign.
He bet his life on the campaign. He bet a lot on the campaign. But ultimately, it's not like he would have used the life insurance policy to pay off the loan. If he lost, he would have used the public funds. So it's a kind of a gaming of the system that may or may not be legal. We don't have a functioning FEC at the moment to decide whether it's legal, although in the past they did decide that a candidate could opt out of the funds.
We should point out these decisions are always made months or sometimes years later.
Exactly.
So if you're in a campaign, do what you want to do right now.
Right.
And then they'll figure it out later.
Right. He could have gotten an advisory opinion if there'd been a functioning FEC to give him that ruling. Anyway, this gets into real arcana. I actually brought this up, and then there's like a listserv of election lawyers and former FEC members and so forth who hashed this out for about a week until I got him saw the real answer. I don't usually read that listserv, but it was pretty interesting that week. So that's issue one, a little bit of gaming the system. Issue two is that he's always gone back and forth about whether he supports the Arizona system of public financing, which is a much better system, and that the governor's been elected under, and Republicans in the state have come to like, and so forth. Issue three is an interesting little twist. Back in the fall, a bunch of reform groups asked candidates to pledge that if their opponent participated in the public financing system for the general election, which is a whole different system where the candidates get about $80 million for their campaigns, and they don't use any private money, in theory, although the party's spending money and so forth. And that system most candidates have always participated in, although $80 million is getting to be a small amount of money.
Yeah, well, Barack Obama pulled in $32 million for the primaries in January.
Right. Exactly, and he hasn't tapped most of those donors for the general election.
Yeah.
So now the interesting question. So Obama and McCain were the only candidates to basically say, with a little bit of caution. Obama's line was he will aggressively pursue a publicly financed general election. They basically pledged that. McCain yesterday, or the day before yesterday, kind of pushed on that and said, watch for Obama to weasel out of this deal. It's an interesting question. What should Obama do here?
Well, he'd be crazy to abide by the limits. I mean,
well,
as it appears right now,
yeah,
there's an enormous intensity gap between Republicans and Democrats. Right. Republicans have been raising a bit of money lately, and they would certainly, they wouldn't lie down and die, but clearly, as I said, Obama got $32 million in January for the primaries from voters who had not tapped out fully, and even those voters who did tap out fully, they can give again for the general election.
Right.
And he has shown an extraordinary ability to raise money in small amounts, and he'll also get a lot of money in big amounts if he becomes the nominee. So it seems to me that he has every incentive not to go along with the system, and McCain has every incentive to try to hold him to it, which would put him on equal ground when, in fact, the intensity and the kind of giving patterns out there in the parties are not equal right now.
Right. Well, it's I think you're probably right, but I have to say it's taken me a few days to get my head around the idea that a Democrat could be unafraid of going into a war of unlimited spending with the party of the rich.
But this is also you have to remember in 2004, I believe the numbers were about $75 million per campaign. Mm-hmm. So Bush gets it and Kerry gets $75 million. They both abide by it. Right. And if you take 5 people, George Soros, Peter Lewis, Stephen Bing, and Herbert and Marion Sandler, together they spend about $80 million to try to defeat Bush in 527 groups, mostly America Coming Together. So it was an insane system then well, and both candidates were working under the limit. So it seems to me to be more reasonable for Obama to just raise money for himself and use it to try to get elected.
I think that's probably right, and I think that even as a civic-minded observer of this, I think it is healthier for the money to be in the hands of the candidate and the candidate's own voice than to be in those outside groups.
Raised from individuals who are giving under limits, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Raised from a broad base of donors of up to $2,300 for the general election. I used to work for George Soros, so I won't say anything bad about that. But it was it would have been better for that. There are many reasons why that's undesirable. Obviously, that it's coming from large donors, but also the very fact that you can't coordinate with the campaign. Obviously, while plenty goes on behind the scenes, the limits make it very hard to present a coherent message and to work coherently. Much better to have it, in the candidate's own hands. And I think I think that then becomes the question between McCain and Obama. Is we're willing to consider this, but what are we going to do about outside groups? And ultimately, they're going to not reach agreement about outside groups, and they probably will. That will probably be the reason why they don't.
McCain was extremely mad at Bradley Schmitt, who was at one time the head of the Federal Elections Commission.
Right.
Basically, because Smith held that McCain-Feingold did not apply to the 527s, to the outside groups. McCain believed, apparently contrary to the law that he helped create, that it did. So, McCain will, he's in such a wacky position as a longtime advocate of these reforms that would limit people's ability to give to him, to give to candidates, and now he's going to find himself at the head of a national ticket, needing every dollar he can against a fundraising dynamo who is raising huge amounts of money completely within the rules that have been set down. That's without any outside help. So, for example, if there's a large gap and Obama is the nominee and has raised a lot more than McCain, will McCain want the help of 527 organizations on the side, which may get $5 million from Bob Perry. Who knows? This is the kind of deliciousness that is
right.
Created on a regular basis in
right.
politics.
It really is, and it is one of those things that makes one feel. And I have a sort of love-hate relationship with all the campaign finance reform stuff. It's one of those things that makes you feel like, when you've created a system this twisted, you've got to pull back and say, what are we actually trying to do here, and try to do something a little more rational. But I don't put, McCain's already had every possible position under the sun on campaign finance reform, so I don't really. He'll take a new one.
The last thing on that, a lot of conservatives like George Will, for example, will just enjoy watching McCain twist from his own petard on this issue, and and to some degree he deserves that.
Yeah,
now,
we can agree on that.
The other thing in the Republican, in the Republican race is the non-go away status of Mike Huckabee,
right?
Who is, by the way, heading to the Cayman Islands to give a paid speech because he needs money, not for his campaign, but to pay the mortgage.
Right.
And I think that Huckabee's
governors of Arkansas tend to come out without any assets.
Well, they make nothing. I mean, the governor of Arkansas, I think, when Huckabee was in, he may have made $35,000 or something as the governor of Arkansas, which is crazy. It's really a terrible system, as a matter of fact. I mean, Arkansas. The cost of living is less in Arkansas, but not like that.
Right.
Anyway, the rationale for Huckabee staying in was that McCain hadn't gotten the nomination yet. Now, with Romney's delegates, if they indeed go to McCain is very, very close to that. And then Huckabee has said that he wants to give voters a choice, and we have Ohio, and we have Texas, and we have Pennsylvania, we have Wisconsin coming up. And he wants to give a choice, but it seems to me that Huckabee has now become kind of the repository of a general anti-McCain vote, which is, in addition to the people who would vote for Huckabee under any circumstances, there are some people who probably don't really love Huckabee, but they really can't stand McCain.
Right.
And they're voting, and it seems to me if you were a Republican Party official, you would think this is a pretty bad situation where your presumptive nominee is being weakened by elections that are closer, primaries that are closer than they should because of this one guy who won't get out.
Right. But if that doesn't have much consequence for delegates, it's not that
No, it's not all delegates. No, it's not delegates, and I don't think McCain has a delegate problem.
Right.
The issue is coalescing around one candidate. And you saw that Mitt Romney, bit the bullet, and believe me, Romney and McCain did not like each other.
Right.
He bit the bullet. He came out and he unconditionally, fully endorsed McCain, which is, what McCain did after losing in such a tough fight to George W. Bush in 2000. I mean, it's just what you do.
It's what you do if you want to be the nominee next time.
Well, yeah, and Huckabee, who is the youngest of these guys at 52 years old, has a serious future within the party. But I think he has to worry about, at some point, maybe fairly soon, maybe before the primary in Texas on March 4, becoming viewed as more of an obstruction than anything else.
I suppose so, but I mean, he can also. I mean, the possibility is that he's running for something else. He's running for president of Evangelical America.
He's probably already there, don't you think?
Probably. I mean, that's always been the question to me about Huckabee. Is he running for president, or is he running for this job that Falwell, Robertson, Dobson, etc. don't? That job's available.
Well, he's already a national figure.
Yeah.
And if you look at his stature, when he started this race, and his stature today, he's hugely in better shape than he was before he started this campaign.
Right.
So, it's all positive for him.
Right.
I mean, it's just absolutely all positive. But I do think he's in a very kind of dangerous period now, where if he continues the race for much longer, and he may be able to do it through Texas, that he begins to look like the guy who won't get on board, which could be a problem for him later on in the party. But anyway, that's the thing.
I don't know. I mean, it seems to me the Republican base has so many factions that kind of form this coalition from the, from the libertarian faction to the evangelical faction to the to the sort of business faction and so forth. And McCain makes so many of them uncomfortable that it seems kind of far more unfair than whatever unfairnesses are potentially in the Democratic rules. Far more sort of unfair to tell all these people in different states that they actually have no one to vote for except McCain.
Now, you think this is in part the result of the winner-take-all system?
I guess so. I guess so. I haven't sort of done all the individual delegate counts, but it clearly has. I mean, obviously, you'd have a lot more reason for Romney to who I don't. Doesn't really represent anybody, but you have more reason for certainly Romney to sort of continue to battle it out if he was
well, but
for a
time Republicans had a 5-man race,
right,
with Giuliani, McCain, Romney, Huckabee, and Thompson, and nobody was going to come out and just pace the field,
right,
with that.
Right.
Nobody was going to lap the field with that kind of thing. So.
Right.
I think if you're a Republican strategist and you're kind of hoping that the Democrats will have some hideous, angry, ugly breakdown over the summer leading to a fractious convention.
Right.
If you're a Republican hoping for that, on your side you would want to see a united ticket.
Right.
As quickly as possible.
Sure.
And so I think that is, you've seen the establishment, the whole elected establishment has just fallen in line behind McCain.
Right.
The only people who haven't actually done it completely are the voters.
Right.
Who McCain won by 9 or 10 points in Virginia. It looked like it was close to begin with. It wasn't close in the end, but on the other hand, Huckabee got a substantial number of votes.
Right.
So my guess is you're going to see overt pressure on Huckabee pretty soon. And as far as this winner-take-all system, I guess we're back where we started this conversation, which is that somebody's got to win these things, and if you do have a system in which a guy wins a number of close elections, but he gets all the delegates, clearly the loser doesn't have delegate strength, but he has some force within the party as the guy who got lots and lots of votes.
Right.
But the party benefits, I think, from the clarity of having the winners be the winners, as opposed to this portioning out of delegates for people so that nobody wins big and nobody loses big.
Right. See, I guess I look at it in a different. Just to acknowledge the basic point. I mean, McCain is certainly the strongest Republican candidate. He always has been. The only matchup in which I think there's a reasonable chance of a Republican winning in November is McCain versus Clinton. So obviously, from a purely tactical sense, that's what you should do. What's always interested me about the Republican race is, it's a party in search of a vision. The Bush Rove delay system that's kind of imploded. It's a party in search of a new message. Huckabee had a little bit of it. It's a little bit of that Sam's Club republicanism. Maybe if we care about families, we need to do a little bit more. Government needs to do a little bit for families. Kind of incoherent. Romney had an interesting little bit of a vision in Michigan, where it was a kind of like a sort of corporatist republicanism.
Bail out the auto industry.
But invest. And David Brooks had a line where he said something like, "This is the way Tories in England spoke before 1979." The kind of pre-Thatcher, to say it's the difference between business conservatives and real free market conservatives. But that's an alternative line. It seemed to me that there was the beginnings of an actually potentially interesting philosophical debate beginning to play out among the Republican candidates. And then it comes down to McCain, whose positions are so idiosyncratic. There's no McCainism. He doesn't represent a coherent philosophy for the future of the Republican Party. He just represents kind of himself. And, so I just felt like there's sort of more of a conversation to be had, and we bring it to an end. But
well, I think that my view of the very same thing you were talking about, the same phenomenon was, you did have Huckabee experimenting with a different message. You had Romney really experimenting with a couple of messages, Iowa and post-Iowa.
Right.
But for Republican voters, it still came down to the fact that it wasn't safe enough to elect their number 2 choice for commander-in-chief. they elected their number one choice for commander-in-chief, and that's what it was. I went to Romney's last rally and McCain's last rally in New Hampshire, right before the voting. And Romney's last rally, he was trying on getting this new message together. He had a big sign on his left that said "Washington is broken," and a big sign on the right that had a to-do list. And he had numbers 1 through 15, and he'd only filled in 13 of the 15. And,
That's great.
And number 13 was written on blue tape, which was very, the Romney campaign was very professional.
Yeah.
This was kind of jury rigged for them.
Right. What was number 13? Anyway, I'm curious.
It was like reduce the deficit. It should have been number 1 or 2. It was so weird. It was all the list was out of order as well. Anyway, he's doing this whole technician thing, and then you go to McCain's rally, which was outdoors in Exeter, as I remember, and it was all duty, honor, and country. Right. And it was an extraordinary performance where and it played on his own military experience, but it played on his desire to defend the United States, whatever it takes. Right. And that, in the end, was what won. Yeah. And now the big question, in the general election, is whether enough voters believe that or not. I think for most voters, many of them at least, it'll be a post-war election. Right. But for Republicans, it won't be. Right. But that's why Republicans made the choice they made. Right.
Okay, that may be. Now let's wrap this up with one last point, and then we don't have to talk about any. We've gone long enough that we don't have to talk about any actual substantive issues like FISA. But part of what you're saying to me is the opposite. It's the reverse of what we talked about with Obama. So that basically McCain is, Romney was the candidate. He had 13 points of substance.
Right.
And McCain is actually the candidate of kind of substanceless cult of personality. And I do think if anybody should be called the cult of personality candidate, it's McCain, who gets support from people who fundamentally disagree with him on very significant areas of substance. Whether they will in November, whether they'll continue to support him or not, I don't know. But it's kind of crazy. I mean, Obama at least gets support. Most people who support him basically agree with him.
Well, look, I would still argue that the key words are commander-in-chief. And I don't think many Republicans disagree with him on commander-in-chief issues. And I think what he offers, he doesn't offer a specific strategy other than to keep the surge up in Iraq. But I think people sense, certainly Republicans sense, that he would be comfortable as commander-in-chief, and they feel that he's best qualified to be that for a variety of reasons that are just out there, not only his own military past, but his interest in military issues for the last 30 years. So I do think that McCain on commander-in-chief issues has a lot more to him than Obama on general hope issues, who really points a lot to his experience as an organizer in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So, it's just two different views of the situation we face right now, which is why we'll have this general election.
Right. Good.
All right. Okay, well, listen, I think that does it.
I'll make sure I vote again in the general election, as will you. And great to talk to you.
Good to be here, and let's do it again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Byron.
Okay. Bye-bye.